draw the line in the dust and toss the gauntlet before the feet of tyranny. And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
In 1963, Southern segregationists got a new rallying cry, and the civil rights movement gained a new arch-villain. But even as Alabama's incoming governor, George Wallace, invoked the spirit of the Confederacy, movement leaders were preparing to challenge segregation and racial hatred in the state's largest city, Birmingham. Like many southern cities, Birmingham was struggling to throw off its racist legacy.
You've got to keep the white and the black separate, just like you got to keep them in school.
The town's top police official, Eugene Bull Connor, embodied the entrenched prejudice of the Old South. He had given Klansmen free rein to beat the Freedom Riders in 1961, just as he allowed them to persecute Birmingham's black population and firebomb their homes with impunity. By 1963, the public outrage sparked by the Freedom Rides and other high-profile civil rights demonstrations had disappeared. The movement needed to provoke the kind of newsworthy confrontation that would capture headlines and TV screens. If you're looking for a fight, Martin Luther King was told, you're sure to find a good one in Birmingham. King and the SCLC launched Project C on April 3, 1963. The C stood for the Confrontations, designed to bait Bull Connor into outrageous action. 9 days in, the campaign was in trouble. Martin Luther King had been arrested for violating a court order and was languishing in jail. It was here that he penned his famous Letter from a Birmingham Jail, concluding that one day the South will recognize its real heroes. King was released from jail on April 20th to find the Birmingham movement in peril. With few adults willing to risk jail time, the city's black youth rose up and marched into history. At 1 o'clock on May 2nd, D-Day, a group of students emerged from the 16th Street Baptist Church singing, "We Shall Overcome." Hundreds were arrested and loaded onto school buses destined for the city jail. The next day, Bull Connor called in the fire department and K-9 units. Teenagers and children became targets for high-pressure water hoses and snarling police dogs. News reports and images from Birmingham spread like wildfire. The New York Times called the events a national disgrace that made a mockery of the legal process. A letter to the Washington Post read, "If the United States doesn't stand for some decent average level of human dignity, what does it stand for?" Day after day for a week, the scene was replayed. Bull Connor filled the jail and then the county fairground with thousands of youthful prisoners. But still, more came. Birmingham business leaders finally agreed to negotiate. Within days, an accord was reached to desegregate the city. Events in Birmingham shone a hard light on America's race problem and influenced many citizens to re-examine their own views on the issue. Among them, President John F. Kennedy. 1 month after the Birmingham settlement, the president made an unprecedented statement on national television.
Next week, I shall ask the Congress of the United States to act, to make a commitment it has not fully made in this century to the proposition that race has no place in American life or law. The old code of equity law under which we live commands for every wrong a remedy. But in too many communities, in too many parts of the country, wrongs are inflicted on Negro citizens and there are no remedies at law. Unless the Congress acts, their only remedy is the street.
The president's call for federal civil rights legislation held staggering implications. but the opposition remained intractable and dangerous. The president was forced to use federal troops to ensure the admission of James Meredith, the first black student to attend the University of Mississippi in 1962. In Alabama, Governor George Wallace, who had promised segregation forever, staged his historic Stand in the Schoolhouse Door to oppose the integration of the University of Alabama. Only after federal troops arrived on orders of the president did Wallace relent, allowing Vivian Malone and James Hood to enter. And just hours after President Kennedy called on the nation to embrace civil rights, NAACP Field Secretary Medgar Evers was gunned down at his home in Jackson, Mississippi. Jim Crow was on the run, but he remained armed, dangerous, and determined to die in a blaze of glory. In the wake of Birmingham and the president's proposed civil rights legislation, Negro leaders announced a mass march to galvanize nationwide support for civil rights. For decades, this had been the dream of labor leader A. Philip Randolph.
Negroes want the same things that white citizens possess. All of their rights. They want no reservations. They want complete equality. Social, economic, and political. And no force under the sun can stem and block and stop this civil rights revolution which is now underway.
Randolph first raised the idea of a mass march in 1941, when he used it as a threat to encourage President Franklin Roosevelt to end segregation in federal government agencies and among defense contractors. 20 years later, Randolph's dream became reality. The March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom would be the greatest mass protest in the nation's history.
Freedom Now movement, hear me. We are requesting all citizens to move into Washington. We are pushing for jobs, housing, desegregated schools. This is an urgent request. Please join. Go to Washington.
Thousands set off for the nation's capital to show their support for civil rights. They came by car, by bus, by rail, from L.A. and San Francisco, from Cleveland and Chicago, from Jackson and Birmingham. Many who opposed civil rights predicted violence, but the march organizers went to great lengths to ensure none came. Security volunteers, equipped with two-way radios, would provide a first line of defense.
This is Freedom 2 to Equality 1.
250,000 participants, some say even more, converged on the mall in Washington, D.C.
We're going to walk together. We're going to stand together. We're going to sing together. We're going to stay together.
In his hands he's got the wide world.
Speakers and performers inspired the crowd. But the one who enunciated their universal call for justice most passionately was Martin Luther King Jr.
Because I have a dream. My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today.
History was written today which will have its effect on coming generations with respect to our democracy, with respect to our ideals, with respect to the great struggle of man toward freedom and human dignity.
Everyone agreed it was a historic milestone in the civil rights movement. It awakened millions of Americans to the quest for freedom and equality, and stressed to Congress the widespread support for the issue.
I believe that the real significance of what we have started here today is that we have laid the groundwork for the building of a functioning, broad coalition of Americans from all walks of life.
The other thing is that we did produce a non-segregated march.
And I think this march will go down as one of the greatest, if not the greatest, demonstrations for freedom and human dignity ever held in the United States.
President Kennedy welcomed the leaders at the White House. His ambivalence toward civil rights had evaporated. With a 60% approval rating, the president looked forward to a second term in which he would consolidate public support for his civil rights proposals and press Congress to enact legislation. But it was not to be. On November 22, 1963, the president was assassinated in Dallas, Texas.
The greatest leader of our time has been struck down by the foulest deed of our time.
As deep grief swirled around Washington, the new president, Lyndon Baines Johnson, sought to reassure the nation.
Today, John Fitzgerald Kennedy lives on in the immortal words and works that he left behind. John F. Kennedy told his countrymen that our national work would not be finished in the first 1,000 days, nor in the life of this administration. But he said, let us begin. Today, in this moment of new resolve, I would say to all my fellow Americans, let us continue.